Today we're going to make a beef stew called Nilaga. It's a Filipino beef stew. It's perfect for the cold months. You're not going to want to miss this. Stay tuned. So first things first. Okay, are you tuned in? Beautiful. So we take bones. I'm using beef neck bones and I'm using pork bones. Now you can use just beef, you can use just pork, you could probably use just chicken, but I think traditionally it's either beef or it's pork. Now what we're going to do is the ramen recipe kind of technique thing, which is I soak my bones in water overnight in the fridge. And what that does, that draws out all of the blood. So I just fill those bones in a big old pot with some cold water, throw it in the fridge overnight, let them soak. And then what you're going to see is next day, they're going to be really bloody and red, just like that. So we're going to dump all that blood out and we're going to give them a nice rinse. So this makes a little bit of a clearer, more refined broth, I guess you could say. They use this a lot in ramen. I really think that this is just like the best technique for making good broth and good soup. So I'm just going to rinse the blood off. Now, next step is basically blanch the bones and get all of the impurities out. So in order to do that, we're going to bring the bones to a boil. So cover those rinsed bones that have been soaked overnight with cold water, bring it up to a boil, and just skim all of that scum away. So you see that that water is really dark, is pulling out all those impurities, all the blood, all those nasty bits. So just boil at a low pace. It doesn't have to be a crazy rapid boil. Just boil for like 15 minutes, okay? A lot of times people don't boil long enough, but just boil until the scum is gone. Boil for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, totally fine, okay? And then once they're boiled and the scum is gone, you're gonna just drain them, right? So you're gonna just dump them in the colander and you're just gonna rinse off all that scum with cold water. So what this does is basically pull out all of the impurities. And now at this point, you're ready to make your soup. So this is a technique that they use in ramen all the time, especially in like tonkotsu, but I'm using this in Nilaga and it works really well. It turned out great. So now I'm putting those bones back in the pot. I'm covering with cold water. And then what I'm going to do is just simmer with just the bones for about 3 to 5 hours. Okay. So the longer you simmer, the more gelatin is going to be extracted into the water and the more viscous and kind of that sticky mouth feel you're going to get. So I went 5 hours with these guys. That was plenty of time. I'm not making like a really thick soup. It can just be, just medium body basically is what I'm looking for. So I simmered for about 5 hours. I skimmed the scum. There's not very much scum, as you can see. So after about 5 hours, that's what it looks like. So it's still, a little bit cloudy, but it looks nice. I mean, it's just a nice soup base. That meat's starting to shred apart. That gelatin's kind of transferring into the water, the soup. And at this point, I'm adding my aromatics. So I'm adding cabbage. I have a piece of peeled ginger. I have scallions, black pepper, garlic, red onion, potato. And I'm not eating these. These are just for flavor. Okay, but in the meantime, I'm going to simmer those vegetables for about an hour. I'm doing a cooked meat separately, okay? So I'm cooking my chuck roast is what I'm using, but you can use like beef shank is really good, or pork shank that's sliced thin. I'm adding it to an Instapot with a head of garlic and a little bit of that soup, and I'm just gonna pressure cook it over, it should be low pressure. I did high pressure, but do low pressure, add a little bit of fish sauce to make it taste good, and just pressure cook it for about 45 minutes until it's tender. And that's going to give you some nice, wonderful meat. And in the meantime, while that meat is pressure cooking, we're going to strain out our vegetables and our bones. So this is exactly the same technique they do for ramen. So all of those ingredients, you may think that it's wasteful. It is not. All of those ingredients are giving all of their flavor. They're sacrificing their lives for the flavor of the broth, and it makes a huge difference. You don't want to eat those vegetables. All of the flavor of those vegetables has been transferred to that broth, to the soup. Exactly the same thing with the bones. That meat doesn't taste good. So skim it out. It's not a 3 Michelin star restaurant. You don't pass through a fine chinois or anything like that. Leave the chunks of fat in there. Who cares? You just don't want bones and pieces of like vegetable. Now that the soup's strained, I'm adding vegetables that I do want to eat and leave in. So I simmer these for about 20 to 30 minutes. It's cabbage, onions, and potatoes. So while that simmers, I'm going to check on my meat that's been pressure cooking. It is nice and tender. And yes, we are going to use that broth and we're going to use everything. But first, we're going to make sure the meat is soft. We're going to remove the head of garlic because you don't want to eat that. The peel's not good. And then what we're going to do is strain the meat and we're just gonna put that in the soup. Now, what you can do is just dump the whole thing in, which I should have done, but I wanted to make sure that my salt ratio was correct and the meat already was cooked with fish sauce. So I wanted to kind of start with a clean slate. So anyway, I did add that broth to the soup after the video, but for the purpose of this video, add your meat directly into the soup base, and now it's almost ready. So there's no salt in that soup base. We're gonna season after, very much so like ramen. I think that's one of the best techniques you can use for soup. Now we're adding bok choy. I cut off the bottom parts. They take a little bit longer to cook. We're gonna simmer those for about 5 minutes, and then we're gonna add the leaves the last couple minutes. And now once those leaves simmer for 3 to 5 minutes, you're good to go. And of course you can add long beans and you can add corn, which I think is very traditional. You can add like taro root or whatever vegetables you want. This is just kind of a rustic soup. So traditionally the seasoning is salt and fish sauce. So what I'm gonna do is just use fish sauce. So I'm doing 25 milliliters of fish sauce, but that was on the more aggressive end. If you want something a little less salty, try 20 milliliters of fish sauce. Okay, and then the ratio is 300 milliliters of your soup, more or less. And that is a great seasoning ratio. That is well seasoned and that tastes really good. And it is night and day. Trust me, when you put that fish sauce in versus when you taste it alone, it is transformed 100%. And now all you have to do is add the amount of vegetables that you want to the bowl. And I'm trying to make it look a little bit pretty, but you know, it's very rustic, so it doesn't really matter. You just kind of pile it in there. Everything is gonna get seasoned from that broth, and it really has a good mouthfeel. It's not overly thick, but it's also not watery. The seasoning is spot on. The vegetables are really nice. This is just a really nice bowl, especially for the winter time. So I hope you guys try this out. Leave in the comments below if you do, and if you liked it or if you didn't like it. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Stay tuned for more videos coming soon in the near future, and have a wonderful day.